Hello and welcome back to Read Becca. Let's talk AI. I read recently 2 books, one fiction and one nonfiction, all about how dumb AI is. And I just wanted to kind of have a discussion about those topics. So first I read the nonfiction book, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You by Janelle Shane. And this really looks at the stupidity of AIs and how specialized they have to be in order to be effective. So I think if you're into futurism, which I really am, I don't think there was a whole lot of new material there, like cases I had not heard of, but she just collects everything so well in such a consumable format that I think this is great whether you are really experienced on the topic or it's completely new to you. I think it's extremely accessible and really humorous. So it is specifically presented to be very funny. As well, I listened to this on audio, but it comes with about 100+ pages of little doodle drawings illustrating the problems. So I really recommend checking that out. If you do get the audio, make sure you read through the actual cartoons because they're great. So I'm not going to get into any of the real specific instances she cites, and some of those will come up later, but really I think that this is a really great work and very enjoyable to read. So I'm going to come across maybe overly negative when I thought this was a wonderful book, but I definitely had some thoughts and criticisms of the way it was presented. Really, she leans very much into that humorous element, and in doing so, it comes off real dismissive of the capabilities of AIs. I'm not sure how great that is considering that it is in daily use all over the place. It is putting people out of jobs. So for instance, she talks about self-driving cars and talks about all the problems of that. But then she never really balances that out by coming back and talking about the fact that self-driving cars are a thing. Like they're out there, they're in effect. So clearly the problems have not stopped us from moving forward. So she also did not come back around and talk about, as a purely broad generalization, obviously you would need to look at specific examples to make this statement, but broadly, self-driving cars are less error prone than a human. So that leads into what my other kind of big issue was with this, that it seems very ethnocentric. I don't think that's the right word. I should know what the right word is for this, but it gets into a circular argument of human thinking is better because it's how humans think, right? And that's not necessarily the case. We are looking at these non-human minds is really what we're talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence. And for instance, she does cite an example where a dolphin's problem solving is the same as the way an AI would problem solve. So it is a different way. It is a way that's very focused on efficiency, perhaps. And so, you know, she definitely comes at it in going for that humorous tone of just starting with an assumption that the human way is better. And that leads me kind of into my final point, which is that there isn't really a single human way of thinking, particularly as someone who is on the autism spectrum. And non-neurotypical ways of thinking, neurodiversity, is becoming a bigger and bigger topic. So when I'm hearing her talking about the ways that an AI or a non-human brain has to specialize in order to accomplish these tasks, and the way it focuses in very specifically on a certain element rather than looking at the whole of the issue, that to me is very neurotypically minded of her, and it doesn't encompass the grander scale of neurodiversity, where you absolutely have people already, the human mind, with autism, with other neurodiverse traits, where they are very good at doing very specialized things. So that to me felt like it was a missed opportunity to discuss that. She also starts from the place of, well, it takes a very long time to train up these AIs, and that's why there's a problem with it. But if you look at it, when we're babies, when we're first learning, we are doing the same behaviors that she walks through with these AIs, where they're learning to group and label things. You know, we all had those block toys where you had to fit the shapes into the right hole, and you know, so we all went through literally years of our brains doing that activity. And you know, so she's discounting the AIs based on relatively short-term periods of machine learning. And so I feel that this was a great book. I think it's a fabulous book, and just about anybody should read it. But those are the things that just stuck out to me as really huge misses. So I think there were quite a few choices for humor over content on the author's part, and that was probably the right choice. It would have been a very long book if she really delved into these topics, but these are the topics that came to my mind when reading through. I think it probably could have been a little more balanced and talked about the ways that AI is succeeding and the facts of the matter that, yes, she mentions humans will still be needed in a lot of these places, but you're realistically talking about huge amounts of layoffs. She cites examples without pointing that out, that, oh yeah, there will still be humans around, and one human is there to keep up the AI, you know? So, and she says that without spelling it out. So then the other thing I want to talk about is Qualityland by Marc-uwe Kling, and translated by, I think, Lynn Searle. Yep, Lynn Searle. And this one is a novel. And for me, it felt like a novelization of the nonfiction book that I was reading. It was incredible to be reading them at the same time. So Qualityland is all about this far future where algorithms are just a huge part of everyday life. So it's like a take on the way algorithms are integrated in our daily lives now, but just cranked up to 11. So it's like a humorous, satirical Black Mirror episode, very much. And this book is broken down into 3 perspectives. So we have, and people's names, their last names are based on their parents' career at the time they were born. So we have Peter Jobless, and he's not jobless himself, but he is a very low status person. The second perspective is Martin Chairman, who is also a chairman himself and a high status person. And then we have John, who is an android that is running for president, because humans are too inefficient, and it seems like it might be a good idea to have an android or an algorithm as our president, right? So I read a lot of AI focused fiction, and you have things like Murderbot or the Catnet series, and in those you have these very, very much humanized and emotional AIs, and that's really the point of them. This is not that. So this is exactly what You Look Like a Thing is talking about, where it's talking about these AIs that have a very focused function that's programmed into them, but they're kind of dumb otherwise. And so this covers all the problems of having those AIs so ingrained into your life. The narrative is mainly about Peter and his being a low status person and how that affects his life. And I won't say what the item is, because part of the humor of the book is exactly what's sent to him, but essentially machine learning and algorithms have made it so everything about you is your profile. Like, it's trying to predict everything from its knowledge of you. And so the shop is an internet store that sends you things before you order them, because it knows exactly what you're going to want. So he gets an item that he does not want. And so most of the story is him trying to figure out how he can deal with that, because he's so upset about this item having come to him that he doesn't want, and he just can't get rid of it. We see him working through that and learning more about all the problems and his frustrating daily interactions. It very much tackles the fact that that profile identity of who you are, and how much the efficiency means that an algorithm will keep pushing you toward the same information that you already agree with, or that you previously are interested in. One of the interesting things in this is that people now basically only read books that are written specifically for them by an algorithm. And if you were feeling in the mood for a book with sexy times previously, you're just going to start getting books with sexy times in them every single time. And so you'll just keep getting that because that's what the algorithm has determined you really want to read. So I'm going to read some things from this book, and I don't think I'm going to get into any spoiler territory. I don't really think you can spoil this book because it's just an illustration of things that are already happening. Some of the things here are directly referencing examples that are used in the other book, in the nonfiction book. And others of these are just really good ways of talking about these problems. So the first instance I want to talk about is this one. It's currently being discussed in Parliament, by the way, whether cases shouldn't simply be decided in favor of the person who paid the most money to his lawyers, says Perry. In that way, all those involved could be saved a lot of time and energy. So that's that kind of stupid efficiency that AIs do, where obviously we want at least the illusion of fairness in trials. But the reality is whoever paid the most to their lawyer is probably going to win in most cases. And so it's technically correct, but in spirit wrong. Next, this is going to be a very info dumpy section. And it's not a spoiler, it's just theoretical and doesn't really play into anything other than explaining concepts. And I think it mentions that, actually. They're talking about a superintelligence, or the idea of a superintelligence, and just calling that God. There's not any religious element to this at all. Will it be a benevolent God? Yes, that's the question, says the old man. The most critical question, even. Generally speaking, there are three possibilities. The superintelligence could be benevolent toward us, to varying degrees. It could be hostile toward us, again to varying degrees, or it could be indifferent to us. The problem is, even an indifferent God could be catastrophic for us, in a similar way to how we're not really hostile toward animals, and yet we've destroyed their living space regardless. God could simply decide that, for example, the production of chocolate hazelnut spread uses too many resources that he needs for other things. Then there would be no more chocolate hazelnut spread. That would be tragic. I mean, perhaps hazelnuts have unimagined data storage capacities, far beyond that of an average roll of sticky tape. Perhaps the superintelligence will also decide that the entire foodstuff production industry is a waste of resources. Why are you telling me all this? Asked Peter. It has absolutely nothing to do with my problem. I'm telling you this, says the old man, because I believe it that everyone should know about it. I'm telling you this so that you see that your problem, whatever it might be, will soon be completely meaningless and your existence pointless. Well, thanks, says Peter. That's a great help. My pleasure. Peter wants to contradict what the old man has said, but there's also immense potential, he says. If we could somehow create the superintelligence in such a way that it likes us, of course, says the old man, then it could be a paradise, happiness beyond all the powers of our imagination. But what? Even a superintelligence that is benevolent toward us, begins the old man, could have catastrophic consequences. Yes, just imagine that. In his goodness, God offers to take on all our work. Sounds wonderful. Really? Imagine that you're an architect, but every building you want to build, God could build much quicker, much more cheaply, and much better than you. Imagine you're a poet. Every poem you could write, God would write more quickly, more beautifully, more artistically than you. Imagine you're a doctor, but every person you want to heal, God could heal them much more quickly, with less pain, and more lastingly. Imagine you're an excellent lover, but every woman you want to satisfy, God could... All my problems would be meaningless and my existence pointless, says Peter. Indeed, mumbles the old man. Even if we succeeded in anchoring protective devices so deeply in the superintelligence that it couldn't be rid of them, or even want to be rid of them, which is very unlikely, but let's imagine it regardless, there would still be the problem of the opposite of good is often well meant. Are you familiar with the Asimov laws? No. And he goes on to explain Asimov's laws. Take the consumption protection laws with their repair ban, for example. All people wanted to do was stimulate the economy, but it also resulted in defective AIs fearing for their survival and trying to hide their faults. I'm familiar with that one, says Peter, but the main problem with Asimov's laws is that the first law is nothing but theory, because it's far too practical to have robots that can kill humans. So the first law has already been done away with. This also made the second shorter. A robot must obey the orders given to it by a human, period. A human? Which human? The orders of its owner. So just imagine that by chance, the first superintelligence comes into being in the computer system of a large mincemeat producer, and its sole directive is to increase mincemeat production. This could end with the entire universe soon consisting of just three things. Firstly, the superintelligence and its computers. Secondly, the production materials to create mincemeat. And thirdly, mincemeat. So that is a famous example, and that is one that is specifically cited in the other book as well. So another kind of info dumpy one. This section is all about the monopoly and network effect. Perhaps I should take a few notes, he says. Good idea, says the old man. Good idea. You know, we thought that the internet would have a democratizing effect. We thought it could generate equality of opportunity. Instead, the income divide is greater than ever. What did we overlook? I'm sure you're about to tell me. Correct. We didn't take into consideration that the digital markets function according to the winner-takes-all principle. That's different than the non-digital markets. An example, let's say there are two ice cream parlors on your street. Ice cream parlor A is a tad better. Where would you go? Well, to parlor A. But everybody thinks like that, so there's always a huge queue in front of parlor A. Sometimes they've even run out of your favorite flavor before you arrive, and parlor B really is only fractionally less good and not as crowded. Where would you go? Parlor B. And that's how the clientele divides itself, because ice cream can't be copied and given out to all customers at once, completely unlike digital products. Rightfully so, rightfully so. Thus, from that we can conclude, even if it were only minimally worse, there would be no reason to use the second best search engine. Winner takes all, loser gets nothing. In the digital economy, nobody needs the second best product, the second best provider, the second best social network, the second best shop, the second best comedian, the second best singer. It's a superstar economy. Long live the superstar, fuck the rest. And so, wrapping this all up, this uses those examples to illustrate exactly what we talked about with the very first book, where the human way of thinking in the ice cream shop example means that we weigh and choose based on different factors, whereas a computer may always go with the most efficient option based on the criteria it's given. So a computer is always going to choose the same way, and we don't have to play into human biases. But this also talks about the way human biases inform computing and algorithms, and both books talked about that quite a bit. So it was an interesting reading experience to read both of these at the same time and to ponder how our human brains think so much differently than the machines that we create, and the ways that the machines that we create accentuate the problems of human thinking. So really all we've done is created a magnifying glass for our own flaws. Human thinking is faulty and weak and misguided and biased, and it's full of problems as well. So those are my thoughts. I would love to hear if you've read either of these, or if you have thoughts on the topic of AI or other books about AI for me to read. I would love that. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my rambling discussion, and I hope you will like and subscribe if you feel like you want to see more.